Please be aware, in this podcast series we talk about all areas of safeguarding, which some people may find upsetting. So please make sure you're okay listening to today's topic. Be mindful of those around you, such as children, that you might not want to listen in. Hi, I'm SSS Safeguarding Director Sam Preston.
And I'm former head teacher and content author Sarah Spinks.
Today we're discussing a difficult but crucial topic, child-on-child sexual abuse. And we're going to sort of focus on understanding the legal and safeguarding implications. So this issue has been brought into sharp focus following the recent conviction of 18-year-old Eshea Sullivan, who was sentenced at Leeds Crown Court in February 2025 for 10 sexual offences against 3 young girls, offences he committed while he was still a child himself. So this case is an important reminder that child-on-child abuse is serious abuse and that young perpetrators can and will face the full force of the law.
Well, I think we should just start with the case itself. Sullivan's been jailed for 9 years and will remain on licence for a further 5 years after release. He's also been placed on the sex offenders register for life and will be permanently barred from working with children.
That's right, Sarah. So his convictions include multiple counts of rape, sexual assault by penetration, and sexual assault. And this case reinforces the fact that child-on-child sexual abuse is not just inappropriate behaviour, it's criminal behaviour.
And I think also it's interesting, this case also highlights effective safeguarding practice. While we often focus on system failures, here we saw Kirklees safeguarding teams and West Yorkshire Police really working effectively, to support the victims and secure that conviction.
Absolutely, Sarah. So their approach really should be seen as best practice, not just in holding the perpetrator to account, but in the way they supported the victims throughout the process.
I think, let's just step back for a moment. Some people may find it hard to believe that children can be perpetrators of sexual abuse. So, Sam, how common is child-on-child abuse?
Well, unfortunately, Sarah, it's more common than many realise. Research suggests that a significant proportion of sexual abuse cases involve children harming other children. So the term child-on-child abuse includes sexual violence, for example, rape or sexual assault, sexual harassment, so that's things like unwanted sexual comments or online abuse, and harmful sexual behaviour. So you'd be looking at things like coercion, force, or repeated inappropriate behaviour. And it's a key safeguarding concern because whilst it's often dismissed as part of growing up, the reality is this is abuse and it has long-term consequences for victims.
I think that's a really important point, that. It's not about criminalising normal childhood development. It's about recognising when behaviour crosses that line into harm and exploitation.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the role of schools. Schools have a statutory duty under Keeping Children Safe in Education, KCSIE, to prevent and respond to child-on-child abuse. What does that actually mean in practice?
Well, it means all school staff, they must understand what constitutes abuse. So that's recognising the difference between harmful sexual behaviour and normal exploration. They have to follow legal and policy requirements. So schools must have a clear safeguarding policy that aligns with the statutory guidance, as you've mentioned. They've got to think about support for victims and perpetrators. So schools need to balance supporting victims with addressing the behaviour of the perpetrator appropriately. They've got to respond effectively to disclosures. So all staff must know how to handle reports, including unsubstantiated or malicious allegations. And finally, it's about assessing risk. Schools must determine whether a child poses a continued risk to others and take appropriate action.
So I suppose staff training is really key to all this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. All staff must receive specialist training in handling child-on-child sexual abuse. That's why we have a specific course on this. They must be able to spot the warning signs, respond appropriately, and support all those involved.
So what do you think some of the biggest challenges schools face in dealing with child-on-child abuse?
Well, there's several challenges. I think the first, recognising the signs. Not all cases involve physical force. Abuse can involve coercion, manipulation, or online exploitation. Then there's the management of disclosures. Children may be afraid to report abuse, especially if the perpetrator is a friend or a peer. Also, there's the handling of unsubstantiated reports. Schools really must take all disclosures seriously, but also ensure fairness in cases where allegations are later found to be false or malicious. And then it's balancing safeguarding and education. So schools must support victims whilst also managing the impact on the wider school community, and that's a challenge.
It is a challenge, and they also have to support the perpetrator's education as well, don't they?
Absolutely.
Which can be quite a challenge. So it sounds like schools need, that really clear guidance and robust safeguarding policies.
Exactly. Schools should ensure that all staff know the procedures, that, their pupils feel safe to report concerns, and that, there's a whole school approach to preventing abuse.
So what steps should schools now take to strengthen those safeguarding practices against child-on-child abuse?
Well, my suggestions, key actions would be review and update policies, ensure your safeguarding policies explicitly cover child-on-child sexual abuse and all the procedures you've got in place and how you could manage concerns, etc. Strengthen your staff training, provide that specialist training. As I've said, we've got a course on this. That training should include recognising and responding to abuse. I think it's creating that culture of reporting. Make it clear that all disclosures are taken seriously and ensure children know how to seek help. I think it's about also assessing risk proactively. So if a report is made, conduct a thorough risk assessment to protect all involved. And that's not an investigation, that's a risk assessment. And we need to be very clear that, about the distinction there. And then engage with parents and carers. Schools should work with families to raise awareness and to offer support.
That's really important. That's a solid framework, really. It's about education, prevention and response, isn't it?
Exactly, Sarah. So schools must take a proactive approach because prevention's always better than intervention after the harm's occurred.
So looking back at the Sullivan case, what is the key takeaway for schools, do you think?
Well, I think reflecting on this case, the key takeaway is, child-on-child sexual abuse is real, it's serious, and it must be treated as abuse. Schools, they must not dismiss harmful sexual behaviour as just children being children. Safeguarding policies must address child-on-child abuse, and staff must be trained to handle disclosures properly.
And legally, does this case make it clear that young perpetrators can face serious consequences?
Absolutely. A child committing sexual abuse is still committing a crime, and cases can and do, as we've seen here, result in prosecution.
So I think the message for schools is really clear, isn't it? Educate, prevent and act.
Yeah, exactly. Schools are on the front line of safeguarding. I know we talk about this a lot, but they really are. And if schools take this subject seriously, they can protect children and they can prevent harm. So I hope this podcast has kind of given an overview, and for those listening in education settings, I hope it helps all staff and safeguarding teams strengthen their response to child-on-child abuse.